Hey everybody, David Costello here, founder and CEO of Jetpack Workflow and host of Growing Your Firm podcast. Today's guest, returning guest, is Darren Root. If you've been in the accounting ecosystem over the past few years, few decades, you've probably come across Darren's work. But if you don't know who Darren is, he serves as the chief strategist at Right Networks and Rootworks, leading the company's bureau of thought leaders produce timely, relevant, and education-based content geared to move the profession forward. Having managed his own CPA firm for more than 30 years, Darren's vast accounting experience is rivaled only by his passion to help fellow firm owners modernize and transform their practices into thriving, sustainable enterprises. Darren, welcome back to the show.
David, it's great to be here. Sounds like our PR person wrote my intro. So
yeah, well, you've been quite prolific. Did I miss anything or any shout outs you want to mention before we dive into some of the content?
I don't think so. I think the most important thing is that I ran a firm for over 35 years actually now. So it gives me a lot of insight into what's going on day to day.
Yeah, well, I know in a little bit we're going to get into this topic you and I are both passionate about, which is this phrase of smart client management and how firms can kind of utilize this thought process to really elevate themselves into the future. But I'm curious, having been an operator for 35 years, I'll ask a question that maybe doesn't come up a lot, but what hasn't changed in 35 years? What are the founding principles that firms still need to keep in mind, regardless of what's going on from a economic or technological landscape?
I think foundationally is that the clients care most about their own problems and not about ours as firm owners. That hasn't changed. What has changed in that is they expect things a little quicker, a better experience, and all that kind of stuff. But client expectations, other than speed of delivery and maybe method of delivery, hasn't changed. They care about their problems and they want to get them solved as quickly as possible. And they would love for you to be proactive about that if possible.
Yeah, I think that makes sense on all fronts. And if we were to rewind, into the past, I'm sure people are still saying, "Oh, it's so hard to get a hold of clients. It's so hard to get X, Y, and Z."
Yeah.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's an interesting foundation kind of set today's topic. Now, again, I've been hearing about this phrase smart client management, smart client management. What in the world does this mean? Is this a new AI thing? Is this a chat GPT thing? What is going on in the world of smart client management?
David, I go for 7-mile walks every morning. So that's how I work my wine from the night before, I suspect. But so I hit the road every morning early for about 7 miles. And, oftentimes I think about my practice. I think about accounting firms and, it's the blood gets to flowing. And then I came up with terms like, I registered trademark on the modern firm. Smart client management is a new term. Oftentimes you just need a term or a way of talking about something so that you can get a lot of people on the same page. And that's what smart client management is. It is actually this idea that when you take on a new client, well, let me back up. I think the easiest way for me to explain this is if we go back to what you and I kicked off with is clients, in their ideal world are getting their problem solved. And that's what they've always wanted from their professionals. The challenge is accounting firm owners are always working behind the 8 ball because they're waiting for the client to ask them something so that they can react to whatever's been asked. And I got to thinking one day, if we specialize in optometry practices, if I knew exactly what the ideal optometry practice looked like from or what would it mean to financially holistically serve an optometry practice, what would that look like? If I knew what that was and I could actually write that down and I could make sure that every optometry client that we took on, if I could benchmark where they're at when we take them on and I could get them to holistically being financially served, that's smart client management in a nutshell. It is figuring out whatever I don't love the word niche because people get all caught up in, well, I can't serve one type of client. it's more about, who you like serving, and it doesn't have to be a single niche like an optometry practice. It could be service-based businesses, for example. The reality is holistically serving service-based businesses, whether that's dentists or optometrists or, public speakers, whatever you want to call it. Most of what it means to financially holistically serve, though, is pretty much the same. There's some KPI differences, if you will, between, sort of the different industries. But largely they need retirement plans. They need kids' education plans. They need health savings plans. They need to be on the right technology stack. All this stuff, that largely lives inside of accounting practitioners' heads. What I'm advocating as smart client management is getting that down on paper, and then making sure that every week you're moving towards holistically serving that client. Because anybody that's practiced knows what really happens is you chuck a client into the system and then you forget about them, you go on to the next one, right? And if they move forward, it's because they were persistent or you got lucky. It's not because you had a systematic approach to moving them to where they really need to be. And in a nutshell, that's smart client management. Sorry, it's a long answer to a short question.
Yeah, no worries. I think it's really interesting to think not only about the business. We've had a lot of content in the past of saying, well, bundle these services, try to layer in some cash flow forecasting or what have you when you approach the business, bundle it into a monthly subscription. So and I'm simplifying it, of course, but there's kind of that component. But you're saying, okay, let's also look at the business owner and make sure that their goals, whether like you said, college savings, retirement, this, that, and the other thing, there's some holistic view. So when you think about smart client management, are you going down the path of saying prescriptively as a firm, you should be offering individual kind of wealth planning, or should you think about partnering with a wealth management firm? Do you have a hard stance on it, or is it just like, as long as you have this solved for the client, it's fine?
That's such a great question. My take is that the firm needs to be the quarterback, and whether they have that skill set. For instance, let's say that you're a dental practice and you're doing some R&D kind of work, and you qualify for an R&D credit. Well, there's a great chance that if you're a small accounting firm, you have no skill set in doing R&D credits. So you need to partner with somebody. Or if it's wealth management, or it's risk management, it could be insurance. But somebody needs to make sure that all of this is being done for that client. And I believe that's the accounting firm. They need to know what the playing field looks like. They need to know what all those things are. It's funny, when I was recently doing a session on this at our Rootworks Inspire conference in Sarasota back in December, David. And when I started talking about this to a group of about 200 accounting firms, a guy raised his hand. He said, let's just crowdsource what it looks like to holistically serve an optometry practice. And next thing you know, we have all these ideas coming in and we're making notes. As it turns out, there was about 30 or 35 different points, if you will, that made up what it would look like to financially holistically serve an optometry practice. And if you had an optometry practice that was doing all of those things, man, it would be crushing it. But we hear this question all the time: what is business advisory services? Or we should be doing more of it, or whatever. Business advisory services is knowing what it means to holistically serve that client, figuring out where they're at today, and filling those gaps. That's what it is. And everything in between where they are and where they should be is a product. Now you could bundle those products. You could say, oh, we're doing, budgeting. I mean, whatever you want to, however you want to sell your product, fine. But everything in between there is a product that client needs. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, two questions. The first one is, where, if at all, you mentioned 30 to 35 points. It makes me think, like, where is the line as you run downfield with kind of the back office spectrum. So wealth management is here, insurance might be here. Is HR required? Is legal required? Like where does it kind of become too unyieldy, or is it, look, what does the client need? And then we'll figure it out. It's not saying you have to build all these things out. You just need to figure out, like you said, be the quarterback.
I think it depends on the kind of firm you are and the skill sets that you have and how deep you want to go. Let's say you're a bookkeeping practice and where your real skill set is in that compliance back office bookkeeping. But chances are maybe you don't have the skill set if you're not trained, to think about risk management or retirement planning. So again, figure out where your frame of reference or sort of what you want to be doing, and make sure you're doing all of those things. And the more sophisticated a practice that you become, maybe the wider that field becomes for you. But I think you have to sit down and figure out, okay, so if I'm going to do the very best job for this client I possibly can within, what I want to work in, what does that look like? Because again, the reality is most of us just kind of take the client, we kind of meet the client where they're at when they come in the door.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't do a whole lot unless we get asked. A lot of that happens, tends to be because everybody's super busy and they don't think about it. Oftentimes it's because there's no roadmap as to where you really want them to go. So there's all these things. So I would take Smart Client Manager, and I would add one more point to that, David. It's actually appointing somebody in your practice to be a Smart Client Manager. So if the concept is Smart Client Management, somebody needs to get up every single day thinking about, are we moving forward with these clients? Now, that doesn't mean they have to do it. Let's say you're an accounting firm of 10 people and you have 3, accountant managers in your practice, and they're responsible for, all your business clients. They're not going to get up every day thinking about this, but you need somebody in the firm who is the Smart Client Manager that's asking that other manager saying, hey, do we have this client on QBO? They're paying over 100 bills. Should they be using a credit card to do that so they have points, or should we? Somebody needs to be paying attention to those 30 things and asking the question every week, what are we moving forward with this client on? And I think that's actually how you get there.
Yeah, well, it makes me think of one of the follow-up questions I had. So I think, well, I'll say two things. First is a point, and then we'll go into questions. So first thing is, I think, and maybe I preemptively went here, and I think others might do so as well, which is you throw out the question, was the kind of ultimate client experience, soup to nuts, end to end, and what are all the things we could do? And I think where it maybe trips up some owners, from myself included, is we go into edit mode. We're like, oh, here's 3 ideas. Now let's edit. It's like, no. Let's get the 30 or 40 or 50 on the table. Then let's edit, versus getting 7. And then we start to prematurely edit. And then we go down a rabbit hole, and then we kind of get stuck, and you're thinking about implementing, executing. It's like, let's get everything on the table. Right. Then let's absorb it. But the question, one of the follow-up questions I had, which, what is the time commitment to being a QB? Right, it could be contextual on that spectrum and how you want to serve it, but I think it's intimidating. Somebody at the firm needs to be the Smart Client Manager, but how does that adjust from a capacity perspective, and what are they taking off their plate in order to do something like this?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We've started sketching out what a job description looks like for a Smart Client Manager. And it turns out that, one, you probably don't want to take a high-level professional and make them the Smart Client Manager, because this is mostly about capturing data, like, is this client doing these things? And involving yourself in a meeting and saying, hey, here's where we are, and here's what the list of 30 looks like. What's the next thing? They don't have to know more than that. The client manager should know more than that. Say, retirement plans, obviously the next thing. We need to be saving some tax here, or whatever the case might be. So I don't think the time commitment is a huge amount. It's mostly, it'll depend on the systems that you have for collecting data and having meetings and just sort of keeping up on that. But I think this is a day or 2 a week thing. for somebody, depending on your, size of your client base, obviously. I think they can also be, one of the things we advocate as a client communications manager as well, and not different roles, but, somebody inside your firm who's doing all the communication with clients, again, especially as it relates to tax. You can have a smart client manager and a client server or client communications manager all be the same person. Again, it's mostly about standardizing and systematizing and collecting information, and then acting on that. So it's probably one person, and it's maybe not their full-time job. Maybe they're doing a couple other things.
Interesting. Well, thinking about this, kind of new or updated responsibility for smart client manager, the spectrum of possibilities you can implement to service the client. What does this unlock from there's a lot of retention benefits. So I'm sure you can draw out the lifetime value of a client and it just skyrockets, because why would they ever leave, even if you add 1, 2, or 3 in addition to standard accounting services? But what does this do from a pricing and positioning perspective? Like, how does this kind of unlock maybe new economics where having this manager spend a day and a half on this is really a no-brainer?
I think, most firms, when they think about growing, they think about, how do I go find new clients? And I find those are the toughest, generally speaking, the toughest way to grow, because you have to onboard that client. You have to kind of get them there's a lot of time commitment and cleaning them up, getting them onboarded and all that kind of stuff. Selling more to existing customers seems to be where the gold is at. They're already onboarded, they're already in your system. So then it boils down to, how do I identify and package and price this? But I think there's just a ton of revenue between where clients are and where clients should be. I can't ever remember a time, David, when I said to a client, hey, I've got an idea that's going to save you $10,000 a year. Would you like to hear more? Every time the answer is yes. Oh, yeah. Would you like for me to help you implement this? That doesn't mean I have to implement it. It means that I'm going to sort of quarterback the implementation. Some of the things certainly I can implement. Some of the things I need to outsource. We've been helping firms with R&D credits, helping them understand R&D credits better. And I'm yet to have a firm that says, yeah, I want to do R&D credits. But as an example, we did a couple of, education webinars around, why you should be looking in your client base to identify an R&D credit potential. And we had this one Rootworks firm that I connected with a vendor. And the very first credit they did, which included a carryback for 3 years, got the client $760,000 back. $760,000. I would hate to have that conversation with that client and say, hey, I'm getting you $760,000 back. And the next question the client's going to say is, well, what about the 3 years prior to that? We only went back 3 years. And then you have to say, well, we lost those.
Yeah.
Right. This is the risk of not doing smart client management. You miss that. Over 3 years, you cost the client almost $1 million because you didn't ask the question and you missed it. And those are tough conversations to have. So the risk of not doing smart client management, I think, is significant today.
Yeah, and R&D credits is such a great example of, you're not advocating for you to become you can of course apply them to payroll, but you can also sell them. So we've taken advantage of selling them, being a technology company. Yeah. And you're not saying the accounting firm has to broker the sale. They just need to, just say, you need to make this happen. This is real money. And if they have a preferred partner, that's great. Because the last thing we want to do is, have yet another task to kind of vet another firm or agency. We would, of course, do our due diligence. But if they say, look, do your own research, do your own due diligence. We've had success or we've heard good things about this firm. Happy to introduce you to Susie, Karen, David, doesn't matter, and it's just a wonderful relationship that they're building out with that client.
One of the things we do in Rootworks, David, is we will go out and vet some of these partners and make a recommendation. And typically what we're trying to do is we vet these. One, make sure that the partner's a great partner, but two, see if the firm can share in revenue in some form or fashion. So this becomes a win for for everybody involved. And so sometimes we'll take the pain out of having to go find those partners for firms.
I love it. I love it. Well, Darren, we could talk for a long time, and you've put out a lot of content, and every day it seems like you're putting out new webinar, new book. I know you run podcasts. If somebody wants to reach out, learn more, get integrated in your ecosystem, what is the best way for them to connect with you and your content and community?
I think there's a couple of ways. If you really want to kind of connect with me on a more personal level, it's probably listen to our podcast, which is Better Every Day with Darren Root and John Mitchell. We're not talking about too many tactical things. We're talking about more life things. But we have a lot of followers that listen to that. If you want to learn more about Rootworks and how we help accounting firms, I think go to rootworks.com, and then there's a button at the top right, which is essentially get more information, and you can hook up with somebody on our team that can tell you, what we do. But I think just kind of engage with us. We put out a lot of content, and a lot of the content, is not being charged for. So just kind of follow along, engage. If you want to follow me on Instagram, that's fine too. That's mostly personal stuff. But
all right. Sounds great. Well, we're going to link everything in the show notes. So if you couldn't jot down all the great points Darren was talking about today, you can always go to jetpackworkflow.com/blog. That's jetpackworkflow.com/blog. We'll do a full write-up. We'll link up to Rootworks and all the other resources Darren had talked about. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave a review. It helps us get the word out and find more people like Darren to bring on our show. And if you really love this interview, share it with a fellow firm owner that needed to hear something that Darren mentioned today. I know that's the best way to say thank you to Darren and myself for today's podcast. So Darren, once again, thanks for coming on.
I appreciate it, David.